Hello and welcome to Business and Stuff, the podcast where we talk about business and other things as well, like lifestyle, travel, food, and of course, more business. Today we've got a fantastic guest and I'll pass over to her to introduce herself. Welcome, Terry, to Business and Stuff.
Well, Pierre, thanks for having me. I'm Terry McDougall, and I am an executive and career coach, author of a book called Winning the Game of Work, Career Happiness and Success on Your Own Terms.
Brilliant. So when you say sort of executive coach, what does that, to our listeners who perhaps aren't familiar with that term, what does that mean? What do you sort of do? What do you help people with?
Well, I actually say that I work with people who are high achievers, but they're successful but not satisfied. So what that may mean is that they're not getting the results that they expect given the amount of work and energy that they're putting in at work. Naturally, a lot of times that can be very frustrating, but when I work with people, I help them to identify maybe things that they could do differently, get a better picture of what's going on so that they understand how to navigate in that environment, perhaps identify skills that need to be developed so that they can show up differently and therefore get different results in what's going on at work.
And so if you were to give 3 tips to executives or to sort of budding entrepreneurs in terms of how to perhaps get more out of their day, what would those tips be? And is it a lot around routine, or is there other things that can help you be successful within your everyday?
Well, it really depends on what the situation is. And the first thing that I ask people to do is kind of step back and think about how they would like things to be in their situation. So get clarity on what is that goal. Because a lot of times when people come to me, all they know is they're not feeling right? They feel stressed. They have, a bad feeling that maybe their boss is not happy with them or something like that. And so we really try to get clarity on, okay, what's going on and what would you like this situation to look like? And then that leads us to be able to see, okay, well, if we're here and we want to get to that goal, what are the things that we need to do to get there? And I'll work with them on developing a roadmap. And all of these things that I'm saying, people can do for themselves. It's just sometimes hard to be able to do that. But and then once they have sort of the roadmap of things that need to be done, and then it's like, well, how am I going to do this? And there's a number of ways. It could be that, okay, maybe you're doing too much work, and if you're the boss, you really need to delegate more so that you can spend more time on the higher level activities that only you can do. It could be that, you're avoiding having difficult conversations because you're not quite sure how to address that. And in that case, you might be realizing like, oh, I really would like to get more productivity out of this person on my team, but, I need to give them some tough feedback so that they understand what's expected of them. But maybe we're avoiding it because we're afraid that they're going to get upset or they're going to quit or whatever. There are tools, I teach these tools, but I also refer people to resources. Like, for example, in that case, there's a book called Crucial Conversations that I've referred many of my clients to read and understand, okay, how do I address this uncomfortable situation where I really need to have this conversation, but I'm not sure how to approach it.
And I mean, in terms of the executives, what do you tend to find is the most common problem that tends to sort of hold them back? I mean, is it things like relationships? Is it stress? Is it being overworked? I guess that's relating to stress. Is it time management? I mean, what do you find is the most common problem that tends to hold people back?
Well, all of those ones that you mentioned are very common. But I would say sort of, if I had to look at the umbrella of what maybe goes over all of those, it's lack of perspective. So a lot of times as people rise in an organization or as they take on more responsibility, they don't really reposition themselves within that environment. Like, I've seen many people that have gotten promoted and they sort of continue to do their old job while they're also trying to operate at this higher level. And naturally, that becomes very stressful as they're they haven't mentally promoted themselves and started recognizing like, oh, I have more resources to use at this level. And so therefore my responsibilities and role are going to need to evolve. For example, they may need to delegate more, but a lot of times as people rise, they'll tell themselves things like, well, I can just do this faster, so I'm just going to keep this part of my old job rather than delegate it, because they'll say, oh, well, it's going to take too long to teach that person. But these are the things that become part of the new job. You're going to spend more time communicating the vision. You're going to spend more time observing your staff and determining who needs development, who needs training. You're going to spend more time determining whether you have the right people in the right roles. Nobody ever tells anybody that, and so, I've seen people that, hooray, I got promoted and now I went from working 50 hours a week to working 70 hours a week. And, who can get excited about a quote unquote promotion like that? But, generally it's because they haven't been taught to look for the leverage points where they can have more impact with less of that brute strength, work.
Definitely, yeah. And do you find that you work with people who are perhaps very successful, and they get promotions and so forth, but they get to a stage in their life where they feel that this isn't them, this isn't what they want to do, and they have that crossroads dilemma of do they keep going, do they advance up the ladder, so to speak, and get promoted again and again and sort of work hard and live this type of lifestyle, or do you feel that they sometimes get to a point where they want to have a change of direction or move career path, perhaps maybe into a different sector? Do you feel that there's a stage in most executives' life or in their mind where they do have sort of cross path moments where they really have to think? Is that a sort of common problem that you tend to find?
Yeah, I see that quite a lot. And I think that's really natural because, especially people that are in leadership roles, they tend to have kind of a growth and challenge mindset. Like they're looking for what's my next challenge. And when they master something, maybe it's not as interesting anymore. And so they start to wonder like, what's next? And so, yeah, that's quite often. I will work with people on that. And sometimes maybe there's not an obvious or natural next step within their organization. And so that can leave people in a little bit of a, maybe confusing is not the right word, but just a place where they're like, I'm not sure what direction to go in next. Pretty common.
I think a lot of people, a lot of very successful people, they'll work their way up the ladder in life, and they'll get to a point where that there isn't perhaps, or it doesn't seem like there's a lot more that they can achieve within that role. And I think they really think about what is next, what's the next challenge. And I think a challenge is a huge motivator for a lot of people. And like you say, some people will change company perhaps if they feel that that there isn't enough there left for them, and it can be a huge change. And it's great that you help people sort of overcome that. Talking now more about the pandemic, and I know you're there in the States and I'm here in the UK, and things perhaps are slightly different in the way that the pandemic's hit. Remote working, which I think has always been on the on the radar of the States. I think you've always been in front of the curve, so to speak, in terms of things like remote working, giving people flexibility, thinking about executives, thinking about mental health and mindfulness. But how has the pandemic affected the way that a lot of people are working, a lot of companies are working with their employees, and what problems have those potentially sort of brought about?
Well, first of all, that's a great question. Secondly, I would also say that while many companies in the United States have embraced remote working, many had very, conservative views on that and really wanted everybody in the office. And it'll be very interesting to see what the new normal looks like if some of those companies that previously did not embrace this will realize that their employees actually can still deliver a lot of value without coming into the office. But some of the issues that I've seen, actually it's interesting because I did a survey among marketing people in December and January about how the pandemic had impacted their career satisfaction, and about 44% of the people surveyed said that it had not had any impact, positive or negative. It was just pretty much the same. But equal amounts said that it had either negatively or positively impacted their job satisfaction. I found that really, really interesting. So 27% said it was worse and 27% said it was better. So the people that said it was better, the comments really were around mostly flexibility, the fact that they maybe cut 2 or 3 hours of commuting time off of their day, or they could walk their dog during the day, or they could choose how they structured their work. Like maybe they might take the afternoon off, but then come back and work more in the evening, that kind of thing. The people that were less satisfied, I would say in general, felt that it was hard to draw boundaries between work and home. And I've seen that with a lot of my clients as well, that, sometimes people almost feel like, they feel guilty when they're working from home, even though during the pandemic, there was no choice for many people. I remember talking to one of my clients and she said, well, I just feel like, if I'm at home, I have to prove that I'm doing work. And so therefore I'll work later. Or, she had her office, quote unquote, office set up on her dining room table. And she said, well, every time I walk by my computer, even if it's 10 o'clock at night or on the weekends, I feel like I need to stop and check my email and see if anything's happening. And, the reality is that when people were in the office, there was a physical boundary between work and home, right? Like that you just closed your laptop and you left it at work and you went home at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. And, when you came back the next morning, you'd see what came in, right? But because people are at home, they're doing that at all hours. And a lot of times to kind of quell their anxiety about like, oh, does the boss know I'm working because he or she can't walk by my office and see me and they're doing this.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I guess flexibility is great, but there's almost two schools of thought on it. There's the flexibility of being able to work at home, which a lot of people, like, but they have to be able to shut their laptop or their computer at the end of the day and be able to shut off and not have it invade their personal life. And then there's people who are completely on the opposite side and don't like, being able to work from home. And like you say, they find often that they overwork because they feel this guilt of, needing to be seen to be productive, and also not being able to detach from work at the end of the day because really their work is now at home. So it very much invades on their personal life. And it's interesting actually as an entrepreneur, I from time to time, well, quite a lot of the time actually, work from home. And at the very beginning, when I started my journey, that was difficult for me. And you have to learn to be able to switch off and almost to have a separate room where you can shut the door, very much like, shutting the door at work, and you just leave it there. And another thing I found very useful is everything that was stressing me out, everything that I had on my mind for the next day is to use my calendar to schedule it in or to make notes so I can just leave the room, shut the door and feel completely okay that I'm going to pick up with everything the next day. And that for me was really important. Is there any tactics or tools or perhaps methods that you would suggest to people, executives and people working, maybe even entrepreneurs who have that same problem? They struggle to switch off. They have a sort of a guilt of needing to overwork. What sort of tips or tools or methods could you suggest for them to be able to find a better divide between working and personal life?
Well, I mean, if you really want to permanently change the behavior, it's important to look inside and say, what is the belief that's driving me to do this? Because, like I mentioned, many of us who, started our careers before technology was such a big part of it, you really could only work from work, right? There weren't cell phones, my first job, I didn't even have a computer. So I did get one after a few months, but you had to work from work. Now you can work from anywhere. And so, sometimes we might have a deep seated belief that, I'm only worthy if I'm constantly performing. That might be it. It might be, if my boss doesn't see me, he or she will think I'm, playing hooky and not doing my work. Maybe they think I'm watching soap operas during the day instead of doing my work. And it's important to get at the root of what that belief is and address it. Try to replace that with another belief. And I mean, I think one of the other things that you can do is, if you have questions about, does my boss think I'm doing a good job? Because sometimes we'll tell ourselves like, oh, my boss doesn't like me, or my boss doesn't think I'm doing a good job. And so that drives this anxiety and maybe overwork. And it might be important to go to the boss and say, what do you think about the impact that I'm having? Where could I do better? And use that as your guide for how much work you should do or you need to do. And I say that I want to deliver that message with a grain of salt, because it depends on your boss. If you've got one of those bosses who believes that you should be working 24/7, and then you may need to put a boundary in place in terms of what you believe a fair day's work is, and stick to it. Because otherwise, if we put our worthiness as a worker in somebody else's hands, and we're always looking to them to say, oh my gosh, am I doing a good enough job? There's a lot of unscrupulous people out there who will use that to manipulate you to work your tail off until you're in hospital. And you've got to save yourself. You've got to really understand, what do I need in order to continue to perform? And most people need rest. They need time off to have fun, to recharge and rest. We need to separate ourselves from work sometimes just to enjoy life. And then we'll come back to work and we'll have the energy we need to perform.
Definitely, yeah, and that kind of leads me to a point that I've noted down to ask about. There's an entrepreneur, I believe it's Richard Branson, actually, the CEO of Virgin Group, and I think it's him that wants to promote the concept of a 4-day week, a 4-day business week. Do you think that's a good way forward? I mean, in terms of giving people rest and making sure that there's a work-life balance, does that sound like a good idea? Or do you think that that's not, bosses don't have to give an extra day, and that there's other ways to make sure that people are happy and also sort of efficient at their job?
Well, I think that would be great. I mean, there was nothing that was handed down from on high that, a 40-hour work week and, Monday through Friday is what it should be. I mean, that's something that has evolved over time. There were times when, some people worked 7 days a week, or they worked every day except for Sunday. And, of course, we know that there used to be no child labor laws, so we can decide as a society what's normal in terms of work. And I really do think that we're starting to shift towards, what impact are you having, right? And what's the value of that impact? We're both entrepreneurs, and, we can decide how much time we put into what we do. And we can look and say, okay, well, if I can work 20 hours a week and I can make enough money during that time to, have the income that I need. And then who's to say that I should work more than that, you know? And I do wonder about whether business will get to the point where they are enlightened enough to say, if this person's having that impact, why should I care how many hours it takes for them to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I mean, I employ quite a few people here in the UK, in our UK office, and in Dublin as well, in our Irish setup. And I tend to find that I have to sort of adapt my management style to individuals, because I've realised that there's no set way of working with people. You get some people who
Mm-hmm.
perhaps you have to push and be a bit tough with, in terms of wanting results from them. But then there's people that work better without pressure, and do need to be able to work on sort of their own terms.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's interesting. There's definitely there's definitely no fits all type solution really when it comes to managing people. So that's that's a very sort of interesting point. And a different one as well. When it comes to attire, so dress, what people wear to work. Obviously, it's slightly different now with people working from home. But are you of the opinion that the sort of the .com casual, where you can come in sort of wearing anything that's relatively smart, or do you feel that you really should dress for dress for the job that you want, dress smart, dress corporate, because then you can be a high performer? What school of thought are you sort of more sway towards?
Well, I really think that it depends on the industry that you're in. I spent 21 years in banking. So you can imagine that, pinstripes were the attire of the day.
Yeah.
And it did evolve over the time that I worked in it. I can remember in my first banking job, one of my female colleagues coming and saying, we had to ask the manager if it was okay if we could start wearing pantsuits instead of suits with skirts. It's kind of funny, right? But that was how it was, I guess, in the mid '90s in this sort of conservative bank that I worked at. I saw, even within banking, I saw, at least in marketing where I worked, I saw the dress codes evolve, and I don't really know that it had a big impact on productivity or anything like that. I imagine that for the investment bankers, whenever they're going in to meet with the CEO, they're probably still wearing their bespoke pinstriped suits and, monogrammed shirts and all of that kind of stuff because of what it symbolizes. If you're going in and you want to do a multi-million or billion-dollar deal with somebody, you want to look your best. But I also know that if you were to walk into a Silicon Valley organization in a pinstripe suit, you'd probably be laughed out of the lobby. So I think you really have to adapt it to what the culture of the organization is.
Definitely, yeah. No, I've actually found that going into meetings. We here in my organisation, I'd like to try and make everybody be smart, because I think it has an effect on people's minds. That's my way of thinking. But certainly when I've gone to meetings, I've always tried to look as sharp as possible, tie, pocket square, everything like that. But then I've actually 2 summers ago, I walked into a client, and they were sort of a tech company, very sort of cool, fresh kind of tech company where everybody's sort of casual. I walked in, feeling, oh, I'm going to be really sharp, going to look really good, and I'm going to make a great impression. I walked in and I felt like a sore thumb, sort of sticking out. I just felt really uncomfortable because I was really, really, really too smart, and I just felt a bit of an idiot. And so yeah, it's strange. I think again you have to adapt, don't you, for the environment and the company itself. And yeah, things are really, really changing in that respect. And it's interesting how there's kind of two schools of thought on it.
Yeah, if you don't mind me just adding something here, I do agree with you though that I think there's got to be sort of a minimum standard, right? Like you certainly don't want people, coming into the office, or at least, when I think about my former corporate, world. I certainly wouldn't want people coming in pajama pants and sweatpants and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
Or
And
basketball top.
even recently, I'd say over the last few months, um, I've been, even though I work from home and I'm on Zoom and that kind of stuff, I'm getting up and dressing in a way that I feel comfortable going in and meeting somebody in the office. And
Mm.
one of the things I find is I feel better about myself to get up and dress nicely, even if I'm just sitting in a chair on Zoom all day.
Mm.
And maybe it's a little bit of the backlash against, the months where I had sweatpants on the bottom and a nice top on the top.
Mm. I guess it's that divide, isn't it? I think by kind of dressing the part, it makes you feel more in work mode. Because I guess if you just wake up, roll out of bed, and just literally get straight in front of a computer, which some people do, and they feel very
Hmm.
relaxed, and it can help them, certainly if they're kind of in the creative industries. But I think it can have a negative effect on people, and I certainly suggest to all my team to kind of, to feel sharp in the morning and not actually sort of address the fact of them, being in business attire at home. Obviously, it's up to them. But, I would always kind of suggest that that's the best way, to kind of have the divide, just that
Hmm.
action of having a shower, getting dressed, feeling good, sitting in front of your computer. It makes it so much harder then to think, oh, you know what, I'll go and watch the TV. I'll go and watch some Jerry Springer, So,
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah, I think it, because you would feel more guilty, wouldn't you, to go into the lounge and sit down and watch something when you're dressed, smart. And so I definitely think it has an effect. And if you're on Zoom video calls and stuff, again, it's, it's going to be important to dress sharp. Brilliant. So we've got a few moments sort of left of our time slot, and so I want to kind of bring the conversation around to a really important one. And I saw that President Joe Biden, your new president there, recently brought up some statistics around female pay and sort of female equality. And I
Hmm.
just wanted to get your sort of opinions and to see how you kind of see it within the industry. Have you seen a lot of inequality in the sense of, do you see a lot of successful female executives that aren't getting paid as much as men, and what would your suggestions be to them, and what do you think is the answer to moving towards a world, or certainly in terms of the US and the UK, a world where people are being paid on the basis of what they're doing, rather than their
Hmm.
sex, their race, or any other things that are perhaps discriminatory.
Yeah, that is a big question. That's an excellent question, and I think the answer is multifaceted. And I think that probably at the root of all of this is the push towards more diversity, equity, and inclusion. I worked in financial services for 21 years, and it's heavily male dominated. And the marketing teams that I led were typically female dominated. And I noticed that there were often misunderstandings in the way that women and men communicate. And I also think that, and I think that this is probably based on gender, but on other, points of difference as well, is that when you're a minority in a situation, sometimes you may be cautious in the way that you show up because you're looking for those cues. Okay, am I doing this the right way? And
Mm.
I know for a fact that often within the banking world, that was perceived by the people in power as somebody not being ready for advancement or not being certain about their um, efficacy in a role. And that wasn't the case at all. It really was more, people looking for assurance that they were on the right path. And I think that, when you've got in the banking world here, it was white men, right? It was like I'd go into many meetings and the vast majority of the people in the room would be white men of a certain age. And if you don't communicate in a way that conveys to them like, oh, you're very confident, they're not going to have the confidence in you. And so I think that that's part of the issue is, having the mentoring and coaching for women so that they understand how they need to show up and communicate appropriately so there is that confidence. But I also think that in the leadership roles, they need to understand that, just because somebody communicates differently does not mean that they're not just as smart and just as capable. I think that a lot of times there's like sort of a singular way of believing what leadership looks like. And, I think that the blinders need to be peeled back a bit of people in power to recognize that, there can still be talent there, but just because they don't talk just like you do does not mean that there's not confidence or talent there. So I think that's part of it. But I also think that, as we see more diversity in leadership, that there's going to be more understanding of the different styles of people. Yeah, it's a multifaceted problem. And I know as a leader, I would often coach people on my team to communicate differently with the people in the business that they needed to influence, because just as an example, sometimes they'd want to explain way too much, which in many ways would just undermine that person's confidence in the person on my team. And I would just tell them, like, be more direct, right? Like, lead with what you're looking for. Don't go into a lot of explanation about it, because I'm actually thinking specifically about investment bankers, which that was my first role in the last company that I worked for, was leading marketing for the investment bank. And, these are very driven, very, decisive people. And for somebody to come in and be like, well, I'm not sure about this, and I need your opinion on X, Y, and Z, generally they didn't have a lot of patience for that. And so I would just tell my staff, like, go in and say, this is what I recommend, period. Right. And I think that they would get more respect when they were more decisive, because they were matching the style of the people that they were working with. And so, I mean, I don't want to, put it solely on the shoulders of the people that, aren't getting paid what they should be getting paid. But I do think that that's part of it, that we, if we're not getting paid what we expect or what we believe we're worth, we can start with ourselves and say, what can I do differently so that, I bridge that gap if there's any question about, my abilities here. But I think that, leadership bears the bulk of the responsibility to make the workplace more diverse and equitable and inclusive.
Definitely, yeah, and I think time, is the greatest thing in the sense of making change. So I think time will definitely get us to where we need to be, and all the people that are standing for equality, which is a great purpose, certainly. But yeah, I think that's a great message, to if you want something, if you want a pay rise, if you want to get somewhere, be confident and be direct, and you don't get if you don't ask sometimes.
So true.
Definitely, that's a great message to end on. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Terry. I really appreciate it. For everybody listening, as we draw to a close, what's the best platform for the people who are feeling some of these problems, these challenges, that want to work with yourself? Where can they reach out to you? What social media platforms are on, and what's your website?
Well, my website is terrybmcdougall.com, and people can contact me through that. I'm also very active on LinkedIn, and my handle on LinkedIn is Terry B. McDougall. And if people want to check out my book before they check out me, it is available on Amazon. And again, the name of the book is Winning the Game of Work: Career Happiness and Success on Your Own Terms.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Terry. It's been lovely speaking to you, and we'll keep in touch, I'm sure. And if anybody wants to reach out to Terry, you can do so, and definitely check out her book. It's great. I also have a book out as well called Think It, Pitch It, Sell It as well, another one to check out. So 2 reading material for you to get. But thank you so much for your time, Terry, and we'll talk very soon. Thank you very much for being on Business and Stuff today. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Pierre. I really enjoyed speaking with you.